In our second video in the Integrated Learning System series, I want to tell you the story behind the system and how it came to be. Actually, I'm going to share a little bit about how I learned languages myself. So I hope this will help you understand how the process works. The ILS story. So once upon a time, it all started many a year back when I began learning Portuguese. Now I had an advantage because I came to Brazil. I was living here, so I don't really remember actually studying the language. But this was the basis for integrating skills in how all this came to be. So I remember that when I was learning Portuguese, there were three basic things that I did, which was watching lots of TV, reading magazines, and talking with people. I remember there was one show in particular that I enjoyed. Watching TV is fun, so it doesn't really seem like you're studying, but there was this program called Jaspion. It's actually a Japanese show, but it was in Portuguese. A channel who no longer exists here had bought the rights to play the series. And although I didn't realize this at the time, they played all of the episodes except the final one. And of course, you know, when you read a book or you watch a movie, you want to find out what happens at the end, right? So I would watch the series, and in this, program, the guy Jaspion was looking for the golden bird to help him overcome the great evil of the universe, and this golden bird held the key to destroying evil and blah, 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 all that stuff, But anyways, because I never saw the final episode, every day I would turn on the TV and watch it hoping that they were going to show the last episode. And maybe that was one of the reasons that I watched this program over and over. And through that, I began to assimilate large chunks of the language and developed my listening skills. So when people ask me today how I learned Portuguese, I usually joke and say that it was because I watched Jaspion. And then I also remember reading magazines, and this was a great way for me to pick up vocabulary. You can do this as well. So what I would do was take a magazine based on a specific theme, like politics, or you can take one based on health or skateboarding or running, whatever you enjoy, and read several articles. Now, what was interesting was that as I would read these articles, I would underline the words that I didn't know. And after reading 2 or 3 articles, I would go back and realize that some of the words I had underlined previously, I had begun to understand. Through negotiating the meaning in the context, I was able to go back and understand those words even though I didn't use a dictionary or hadn't used a dictionary. So then I would go back, and the words that I still didn't know, even after reading several articles, I would look up the meanings in the dictionary, of course, and then try to learn those words through the use of flashcards or whatever system I was using at the time. But it's a great way for you to learn vocabulary. And by focusing on specific themes, you see those same words used several times. So you begin to negotiate the meaning and assimilate that word so you can use it on your own. And then I would go out and talk with people about what I was learning and try to use those words. So it's just like Junior shared in that video we just recorded, if you've watched it, about overloading your brain with the language. He specifically mentioned that he would come to me and try to speak in English using those words, even though it sounded kind of crazy. So basically, that's what you need to do. Just take everything you're learning and go and use it with others. So after I'd been learning Portuguese, people realized I was learning Portuguese. I could understand them. They could understand me. They began asking me to help them learn English. Since English was my mother tongue and most Brazilians want to learn English, they asked me for help so they could learn to communicate in English. And so I actually started off with a couple of friends. We started teaching classes and we had 2 students, and it started growing little by little. And soon we had 2 different class groups, and then we had more groups, and eventually we ended up having people ask us to help them open schools in other cities. And so even another state from here, we've gone over and helped people open schools there. Well, in this process, I started a little blog to help people online, and I recorded a few videos, and all of a sudden, I started getting phone calls from people all over the world. People from Canada, China, trying to think, Angola, and Portugal, all over, different people. These are just some of the people I remember at the time, even Brazilians and people who were living in America, in the US, called saying, hey, I'm living here. This is really frustrating. I'm having trouble learning. Can you help us? And even though I hadn't really planned on it and intended, I actually ended up creating a little course to help out. It was actually the basis, what started the whole plain English method and our simple plan and praxis system for using your daily English praxis, which basically amounted to testing yourself, evaluating your level, setting some goals, and then developing a praxis, a daily English praxis, through a schedule of what you're going to study each day, and then work on achieving those goals to develop your English skills. And actually, if you haven't gone through and seen the plain English method, you can do that. It's available on the site. But basically, I recommend using Simpleology to set your goals. It's a really cool site. It's something I use almost every day, not just for language learning, but for setting goals, knowing what you want to achieve, and then work on achieving them, and then using I'd done this to track what I had done. This is important because many times I would feel like I'd reach the end of the week and I'd be like, man, I didn't study hardly anything. I'd feel really bad about myself and frustrated. But then when I would go back and look at everything I had done, because each day I would write down what I had studied or what I had done that day. So I would write, I studied Duolingo for 15 minutes. I watched a video for an hour, or I studied the course for 2 hours. And then I would go back and be like, whoa, I'd actually look at what I had done. And I remember one week specifically where I felt really bad, like I hadn't studied. And when I looked at what I had tracked, I realized I had studied 10 hours that week. So that made me feel great, like even though I didn't feel like I was making progress, but when I realized how much I had studied and what I had done, I realized this was very, very important. So it was really cool. And ultimately, when we created that little course and released it, we signed up 500 students in 3 days. So it was really cool, really exciting, a lot of dynamic interaction there with those students. Some of them I still keep in touch with today, and that was back, wow, almost 10 years ago. So anyways, after doing all of this, I'd been teaching English for like 12 years or so now, and I started realizing that, I had learned Portuguese and I was helping students learn English, so I was interacting with them, and I had theories about how I'd learned Portuguese and how my students were learning, but I wanted to find a way to actually tweak these ideas, test them to see which ones really worked best and which ones could, be discarded or weren't as important. So I had the opportunity to study French. There was a friend of mine who spoke French, and there were several other people who wanted to study, so we started a small group. And basically what I wanted to do was test all of my ideas and theories, the tools and resources, the things that I was recommending, actually use them myself and find out what worked so I could recommend it to my students and help my students learn better. So what I started doing was during the week, even before the classes, I would go and study on my own. And this was kind of the beginnings of the integrated learning system. So I would take different ideas that I had, and I didn't want to just focus on one skill. I wanted to develop all my skills to be able to communicate well in the language. So I would take simple text, and as I would study, I would create my own stories and ask my teacher to check them. And I would look for podcasts or different kinds of materials that I could use to study and develop my listening skills, read along, learn the vocabulary words, take those words, learn how to join them through grammar structure, and then know how to pronounce those words correctly so I could speak with others and actually focus on learning how to spell and write them as well so I could communicate at every level of the language. And so it was interesting because as I did that, I found that I could develop all 8 of those skills in a very simple fashion using a few simple tools, and I would do this every morning for about an hour. And so when I went into the classroom, I had actually learned quite a lot that I could practice with the teacher and with the other students and then go out and learn even more. So obviously I wasn't studying just on my own. I used several audio courses like Pimsleur French and Michel Thomas, and I signed up for several online courses like on Buzu and Babel and Yabla and Memrise. And so I was using all these resources trying to find out which ones that I like the best, and I was recommending them to my students because I know that my students have a limited amount of time. They can't do everything. Not everybody has 8-10 hours a day to study, right? So if you only have 15 minutes, what's the best thing you can do in those 15 minutes? Or if you only have an hour, what are the most important things you could do? And then take those, learn from them, and go into the classroom and use that classroom time not to learn but to practice. And then of course ask questions to the teacher, things that you didn't know or you had doubts about or that you hadn't learned in the course. So I remember I'd be driving down the street and I would think to myself, there's a man crossing the street. There's a funny looking woman with long hair. There's a red car driving very fast. And then as I try to form these sentences in my head, I would realize, okay, that's a word that I don't know how to say, and then I would go and learn that word and try to find ways to use it. And of course, as well, I would work on developing my network, my French network. I would find people who were learning French through Google communities and Facebook groups, and then try to talk with them in French and use the words that I was learning. So I remember finding a girl from the US who was learning French, talked with her. There was another guy from Russia who was learning French, and I would talk to him. And so in this way, not just studying, but also taking and practicing with real people, just like we teach you to do in the speaking course on building your own personal English network. And then of course I would take all this stuff that I was learning, and every week I would take a quiz or a test to evaluate my level. So my original goal was to reach level A2 in French. And then once I reached that goal, A2, my next goal was to reach B1. So this way I could track myself, track my progress, and see how I was developing. And then, like you learned in the plain English method and how to develop fluency, where we talk about setting specific goals, you know, I knew how long it was going to take me approximately to reach those goals. So like at the month, I would look, okay, I need about another 100 more hours of study time to reach that goal. And so then I would study each day, track how much time I had studied, and then at the end of the week or month, see how much was left. So it's pretty cool when you study this way. You test yourself and track yourself, you see your progress. You don't really depend on the teacher. And I know this is different than what a lot of students are used to, because most students come to me and they say, hey, David, I've been studying for 3 years in this course and I don't feel like I'm progressing. I don't feel like I'm developing. Okay, if you're studying in a course and the course is only 2 hours a week, then you know you're going to study 80 hours in a year, which is what most courses do. Then if you really want to intensify your learning and learn in a shorter amount of time, or you want to learn faster, then you have to study on your own. Now, I know a lot of people say, okay, you know, polyglots are self-taught students, but there's kind of a myth about that, because even, I'm not going to say that no student can learn on their own, but of all the students I've met, they've all studied at least a short amount of time in a school or a course, or been involved in a classroom with other people, because you need people to communicate with. Language is communication, and a classroom can give you a safe environment to practice what you're learning. You can practice with the other teachers and with the other students. So I'm telling you that because I don't want you to think, oh, David's teaching us the integrated learning system, so I can learn on my own and I don't need anybody else. I'm saying that there's lots of ways you can learn. Find what works best for you and use it. But the integrated learning system is extremely powerful, because as you apply it, you're going to develop all 8 skills equally and at the same time. So you're not going to have to go study speaking with one teacher and then go learn some vocabulary words with another. You can take what you want to learn it on your own, go speak with people, your personal English network, or in the classroom or wherever you're studying, and take those tools and resources that you have available and use them. So you don't necessarily have to go out and buy new courses. Use the tools and materials that you have, and you can get a lot of resources for free online. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next video, are the tools that you need to apply the integrated learning system. But just to wrap this up, basically, if you've heard of the 80-20 principle for core skills, you know that the 80-20 principle states, this is Pareto's Principle, an Italian economist. You can look this up online, Wikipedia, or wherever later, Pareto's Principle, and research it. Very interesting. It basically states that 20% of the things you do bring you 80% of your results. So if you find the things that work best for you, they will help you develop the fastest. You can forget about the rest. And one of the things that I discovered for me was that the integrated learning system was one of the best, most efficient ways that I could study the language, which is why I recommend it so highly. So I want you to test it out, try it, see if it works for you, find where you need to develop your skills, and use the integrated learning system to get your abilities and skills up to par so you can communicate in English. Okay? I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one where we'll talk about the tools you need. If you have any questions or something wasn't clear, ask us in the comments below, or tell us your English story, or share some tips and resources there as well. I hope you find this useful, and if you do, please share it with other people, your friends and people in your network. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. You have a great day, and bye-bye.